Not to turn off the dial too soon. We're going to talk now to the man who directed the movie we've been watching, George Romero. And I think certainly that ending, it leaves you about as spent and drained as any ending I've ever seen in a horror film. It's really utterly hopeless, isn't it?
Which at the time that the film was made, I guess, was atypical. A lot of aspects of the film were atypical for horror movies as we were seeing them then. Although the horror genre, and as we've known it other than Hollywood, even, well, everything from Edgar Allan Poe and even EC comic books, which was my upbringing in the genre, was always pretty heavy. It always had downbeat endings and so forth. Corpses coming out of their grave at the last minute and eating the...
I'm sorry, did you try to avoid consciously the happy ending then, the traditional happy ending?
It wasn't really conscious avoidance. It was just, it seemed like the logical way to end the film, on an ironic note. There are a lot of ironies in the end. Ben, who's been the strongest and who was fighting to stay upstairs, survives by staying in the cellar. And then survival, when he finally comes back upstairs, he's killed off by the establishment. And there was some thinking at the time about the socio-political implications of the film, but that wasn't what was uppermost in our minds when we were making it. A lot of people have written about the socio-political implications of it, and that wasn't our main focus. Our main focus was to make a horror movie and stay as true to the genre as possible, and staying true to the genre didn't necessarily mean staying true to the Hollywood genre of horror films. And I think that since Night of the Living Dead, there have been a lot of films that have gone that way. And I'm not entirely because of Night of the Living Dead, as much as it is because of the kind of distribution Night of the Living Dead got. It became a very popular film. And
do you think it was helped, and its reputation over the years has been helped, though, by some of the critics who have written about its social implications or even its racial implications?
It's been helped substantially, and of course we've been helped by it in terms of a reputation, and we have a worldwide reputation because of the film. Financially, that doesn't mean anything. Unfortunately, the two don't always go together. Successful film critically isn't always the successful film financially. While this film was successful financially and critically, the two weren't linked at all. It had its financial success before it ever got any critical attention at all. And that was about 2 or 3 years later when some of the mainline press went to see it, because it was double billed with another picture that Walter Reed had, which was a mainline film.
What was the film?
It was a film called Slaves, which they thought was going to be a really hot item, and they put a mainline campaign behind it. And so the big press went to see that film and hung around and saw Night of the Living Dead, and a few people came out and said, wow, that's a very interesting film, and that's what happened to it. And but that has, while it's done a lot on a career level for me, and it's extraordinary to travel almost wherever you go internationally and have people know your work, and that's something that none of us really suspected would happen when we were making the picture.
Well, it was originally meant to be a drive-in movie. I understand the first title was Night of the Flesh Eaters.
Yeah, which I thought was a juicier title.
Well, why did you change it? I prefer Living Dead.
Actually, the distributor changed it, but it was partially because there was a conflict with an old Universal movie called The Flesh Eaters. And so we never even got down to deciding which was better or which we liked better. It happened because of needing to make a change, and then Walter Reed, the distributor, came up with the title Night of the Living Dead.
Well, in 1968, when the film first came out, my first reaction, and I'm sure the reaction of a lot of people, I know you've heard this, was that I think they've gone too far. The cannibalism scenes were really graphic, and particularly in that time. Did you ever have trepidations about that?
We didn't really have any trepidations about it. There wasn't as much to do in those days about what are people in the media, filmmakers, book publishers, and so forth, doing on a moral level. So there really weren't any moral compunctions. It wasn't an issue, so it wasn't key in anyone's mind. It was before the rating system. And it was just personal taste. It was a question of thinking that horror films always cut away right at the moment that the creature was going to come and eat the victim. And so we decided not to cut away. And
you weren't afraid about turning people off or anything like that?
Not really. Again, it's kind of true to the genre. I mean, the old EC comic books, as I say, were always pretty graphic. And we felt that we had to be graphic in order to not only be commercial, but to be successful in the genre, to have the film pay off. Since there's been a lot of real exploitation of violence where it isn't really necessary. There are some cuts actually in the film that the distributor put in. There are some actual cannibalism scenes that the distributor had us insert after the film was finished.
Oh, they weren't.
So they weren't afraid of it at all. In fact, they wanted more. You know, they wanted as much of that as they could get in.
Well, clearly the film didn't go too far because it was a box office success. But it's always been a little vague as to just how successful was it financially. How well did it do, to the best of your knowledge?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, it did in excess of $8 or $9 million. And those figures get cloudy because there was some litigation involving the company which actually produced the film, which is not my company. I'm a shareholder in it, but I'm not involved in the operations of the company at all. That's the people that produced it, Carl Hardman and Russ Striner and that group, are running the company Image 10. They've been in litigation with the distributor for several years, and the court has awarded them a settlement time and time again, and through a series of appeals, the distributor just kept dodging it, as I understand it, to the point where the distributor finally went bankrupt, and I don't know where it sits now. There was money returned to all of the investors that were involved in the film, I know, and people made substantial profits, but at this point I'm not even sure exactly how much funneled down through that whole system of theaters to distributor to production company to investors.
Well, when the film began to be commercially successful, did you ever think about leaving Pittsburgh and going to New York or California?
I did, of course, and I've had several offers from a couple of the major independents to come and do pieces for them, but there's really absolutely no problem in working in Pittsburgh. I've worked in Pittsburgh for 15 years now, and all of our facilities are here. We have strong financial ties here, even though we do have an office in New York. My current partner, Richard Rubenstein, runs the New York office. He's my producer now. And
actually, you've been working in Pittsburgh on a sequel, as a matter of fact, which we're going to be able to see some scenes from right now, I understand.
Yeah, I don't call it a sequel as much as I do the second part of a trilogy. It's a much different film in that it's a high-action film, more than it is a horror film, although it has horror elements in it. It's an extension of the basic phenomenon of the zombies, flesh-eating zombies, but that's really the only similarity. And it deals with some refugees, 2 SWAT troopers, and a television traffic helicopter pilot and his lady friend, who the phenomenon has reached major proportions and the cities are being wiped out. They take off in the helicopter and they land on Monroeville Mall. And of course the mall is infested with zombies when they arrive, and they are able to capture the mall.
It's Christmas time down there, buddy.
Well, the mall certainly is a switch from that little farmhouse in Night of the Living Dead. It must have made it much more complicated to shoot there than the first film.
It was a very complex film to shoot. The logistics involved and the number of people involved make it a completely different experience.
Well, what about the third? You mentioned there'll be a third sometime, and you're planning?
Well, I would like there to be. Right now, I haven't gone beyond this concept, really. I have a very basic concept for the third film. In the first film, we deal with a small farmhouse, and there's a small group of people involved, and it's the very beginnings of the phenomenon. This film, which takes place in the mall, has a much vaster scope, and I think it carries on faithfully the socio-political concept in terms of the false security of a consumer society. What happens is that the group of people involved get tempted by the things that are available in the shopping mall. They actually win the shopping mall through a series of battles, and here we see them cleaning up the corpses of the zombies that they've been able to fight off.
What do they do? They take up residence there in the
They
mall?
take up residence in a civil defense storage area. And then along comes this band, in the end, a band of organized raiders, looters, that decide they want the mall too. And the climactic scenes are an enormous battle in the mall with these bikers and looters, and our humans are fighting for what they think is rightfully theirs since they won it, which is the mall itself. And of course they're able to get virtually anything they want. They have food and medical supplies, and they in the storage area they set up housekeeping. They have furniture and the latest in stereo equipment and hi-fis and so forth. Of course, there's nothing on the television, so there's nothing that they can watch, and it's a disastrous situation.
You've got some fantastic action footage.
Well, it's a much more action-oriented film than Night of the Living Dead, although it has the horror elements, and it has just as much graphic violence, I think, as the original film. So I don't know if we're going to come under as much attack for it. And we've grown up a little bit. It just doesn't have the same kind of nightmarish quality. It's a much expanded concept.
Take X-Force on 879.
Come on, man, let's go. Get the hell out of here. All right.
They're us, that's all. There's no more room in hell.
What?
Something my granddaddy used to tell us. You know Macumba? Voodoo. Granddad was a priest in Trinidad. Used to tell us, when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth.
And those are some clips. It was hard to put anything together that was coherent because we just finished shooting about a week and a half ago.
It's a very effective preview of coming attractions. How long will it be before we see the feature?
Not too long, actually. We hope to have it finished by late March, early April.
You're editing it now?
Yeah, we're in the process of gluing all of that together and trying to turn it into something. It is a different film. It's much more of a today film, I think, than where Night of the Living Dead was a 40s movie made in the 60s, and this is a 50s movie made in the 70s. And
catching up, then.
Yeah, it's lighter. It's much more swashbuckling, and it's much lighter. Whereas Night of the Living Dead, rather than being a shock movie, it's not like Laugh in the Dark type or Jaws type shocks, where it gets to you by startling you physically with sound and a fast visual movement. Night of the Living Dead has a very ponderous kind of a nightmare quality to it, which I think is the real fear that people find in the film, or the fear experience in the film.
Do you expect it to get the same kind of reaction?
I hope that it will. I think it'll get it'll be a different reaction. Let's hope that it's similarly successful. But I think it's a different enough film that it's going to get a different reaction. It's still a horror film in terms of it being a zombie movie, but it's much bigger. The zombies are a little more sympathetic. We see them organizing slightly now, and if there's ever a third film, that's what it will be about. With Dario Argento, who we're co-producing this film, an Italian director, said that the third one has to be Zombies in the White House, and maybe that's what it'll be. I don't know.